Hao Yi was a worthless bum who couldn't get a girlfriend with that ugly face. However, everything changes when he accidentally finds some love chocolate left by the goddess of love, so he feeds it to all the baddies in school to make them obsessed with him. On the day his life turned upside down, Hao Yi was enjoying his time cosplaying as a background character in class when Zitong, the school's most beautiful girl, walked in and told him she was pregnant with his baby. As his peaceful world blew up, those around him began snapping photos as if they worked for the tabloids. And when he screamed at Zitong for talking nonsense, the simps turned on him, so he grabbed Zitong and ran out of the classroom. Unfortunately, his pursuers spread the word online, making him public enemy number 1 on campus. While he was hiding with Zitong, the delusional girl told him that their bun in the oven didn't like the way he made her run. Hao Yi immediately pleaded with her to stop taking nonsense, but it was no use. Just then, a voice came over the speaker, asking Hao Yi to come to the dean's office, so he asked Zitong to wait for him on the rooftop and ran off. Along the way, he was ambushed by those chasing him, so he went all samurai and beat them up with a broom. But before he could continue on his way, he was pulled into the women's bathroom by some muscle mummies. Their leader, Swan, demanded to know why he was two-timing her with Zitong, and the boy became confused. He told her that he didn't know who she was, and this earned him a table tennis bat to the face. On their way out of the bathroom, another girl, Yuan, threw herself at Hao Yi and asked him to come back home because the twins had missed him. Confused, he asked what she was talking about and got beaten up for supposedly forgetting his wife and 2 offspring. Shuan immediately stepped in, and as both girls argued over who Hao Yi truly belonged to, the guy himself decided to yeet. Unfortunately, he was seen, and the crowd chased him all the way to the rooftop where Zitong was waiting for him. As a last resort, he stepped over the ledge and threatened to jump if they didn't back off. Of course, they didn't believe him, and when they tried to grab him, Hao Yi let go of the railing. However, he never became a tomato stain on the side of the road because Cupid showed up and saved him. She then told him that the chocolate cake he found on the rooftop the previous day was a love chocolate. And since he'd given the rest to the girls, they had gained false memories and truly believed that Hao Yi was the love of their life. Mei thought that being an unofficial harem king was the best thing to happen to a loser like him. He immediately shook that thought out of her and gave her a detailed explanation of how his life was about to end. Mei then told him that if he wanted to solve his issue, he just had to fulfill each girl's deepest desire. As soon as the words left her mouth, Hao Yi asked why she didn't do it herself. Mei was about to remind him that her name wasn't Genie, but then she got distracted by the smell of food and floated away. Instantly, time began moving again, and the group which had watched Hao Yi jump ran downstairs to find him, so he quickly hid. Xuan and Yuan also came down, but they refused to work together since they were love rivals. The only person missing was Zitong, and the idiot Hao Yi immediately assumed the girl who tried to recreate the tragic Romeo and Juliet love story. Immediately, he ran back to the rooftop and was relieved to find her still there, even though she was crying. He then asked her to go somewhere the next day, and she excitedly agreed. She assumed it was a date, but he took her to the hospital to get a pregnancy test, and he began thanking the plot gods when the results came back negative. However, Zitong felt sad and promised that she would get pregnant the next time they made love. This drew everyone's attention to them, prompting Hao Yi to push her away and ask if he could walk her home and explain the situation to her family. Zitong happily agreed, and when they arrived at her family's mansion, he was in awe. He also couldn't figure out what kind of desire a Nepo baby had, but that thought left his head the moment Zitong began talking about the day he came to propose to her. Apparently, he declared his love for her to her father and gotten rejected because he was broke. Hao Yi couldn't believe he was still a loser even in Delulu land, but he decided just to suck it up. Eventually, they were welcomed by the housekeeper, who served Hao Yi some tea and informed him that Zitong lived alone and her father is never around. Hearing that her father wasn't around, Hao Yi decided to leave. Still, at that moment, the bodyguards came in and informed the housekeeper that Hao Yi had gotten Zitong pregnant. He tried to escape, but the bodyguards pounced on him and beat him up at the housekeeper's order. Zitong screamed at them to let Hao Yi go, but everything she said only made his beating even worse. In the end, he managed to escape and grab Zitong. They ended up hiding in her room, and as the bodyguards banged on the door, Hao Yi noticed an old calendar on Zitong's dresser. One day was marked, and he saw that she'd written that it was the happiest day of her life because her dad had dinner with her. In an instant, he realized that Zitong wanted her father with her. So he opened the door and grabbed the housekeeper's phone. The woman had been speaking to Zitong's father, so he proudly told him that he was the one who knocked his daughter up. The phone went dead immediately, and everyone began offering him their condolences. The next second, Zitong's father pulled up with his entourage, and Hao Yi went out to meet him. He was scared but put on a fake bravado, but that didn't help him as the man ordered his men to beat him up. Just before he crossed into the light, Zitong showed her father the hospital results and pleaded with him to leave her man alone. Intrigued, her father asked Hao Yi why he'd lied to him, and he replied that it was the only way he could think of to get him back home. He was pissed, and he didn't care what would happen to him as he called the man out for being in the running for Worst Father of the Year. The man shot back, saying he worked like a dog to ensure his daughter never lacked anything, but Hao Yi argued that he hadn't given Zitong the one thing she needed and showed him the old calendar. His words left the man stunned and brought the entire staff to tears, and before running away like a coward, he advised Zitong's father to give his daughter what she truly needed. A few seconds later, the lazy bum stood elsewhere, trying to catch his breath, but almost caught a train to the afterlife when Zitong suddenly showed up beside him. She explained that she'd come to thank him for risking his life for her sake. When she attempted to kiss him, she suddenly vanished like your struggling hairline. Mei, who had just arrived, explained that the love curse had been lifted because he had fulfilled Zitong's deepest desire, so he decided to go home. The next day at school, Hao Yi was reminded that his woman troubles weren't over. Yu Wan was sharing posters with his face and her number, asking for help finding her supposedly missing husband. Because of that, he snuck to class and tried to lay low, but then Zitong suddenly showed up and started talking to him. Confused, he called out for Mei, and when the good-for-nothing Cupid showed up, she revealed that even though the false memories were gone from Zitong's mind, she had developed real feelings for him. Hao Yi tried asking for her help, but the Cupid disappeared before he could get the words out, so he was forced to accept Zitong's invitation to hang out. A few seconds after he said this, the classroom door was suddenly kicked down, and knives came flying at Hao Yi. The culprit was his childhood friend Shu Welly, and she was there to chop off his family jewels for daring to have other girls in his life. Hao Yi fearfully explained that it was all a misunderstanding, but Shu Welly didn't believe him. So to stake her claim, she kissed him, and then told Zitong that Hao Yi was hers. The next moment, a bag came flying and hit Shu Welly in the face. It belonged to Shu Welly's mother, and she was very pissed that her daughter had left America because of an insignificant twerp. When Hao Yi tried to greet the woman, both mother and daughter told him to shut up and then continued arguing. Shu Welly's mother instructed her to return to the States, but Shu Welly refused, and after fighting it out, her mother ordered her men to bundle her daughter out. After he said goodbye to the woman, Mei suddenly appeared behind him, and Hao Yi immediately began scolding her for turning his life upside down. Zitong witnessed the screaming match and began to wonder whether the boy was slowly losing his marbles. Since he had no idea that he had an audience, Hao Yi kept talking and told Mei about his life with Shu Welly. They had known each other since they were in dippers, but Shu Welly had made his life a living hell. Feeling sorry for him, Zitong approached him, but then tried to hide when he sensed her presence. She also decided to cancel their outing, but Hao Yi didn't let her and told her to let him know when she decided on the time and place. Later, as Hao Yi was heading to class, he ran into Xuan, who suddenly slapped him and told him they were over. Confused, he asked what had gotten into her, but when she ignored him and walked away, he grew angry and told her that her attitude was the reason she was still single. Those words struck a nerve, and after Xuan ran off, Mei appeared before him, calling him a dense fool and saying Xuan was only acting out because she was hurt. Later in the day, Xuan took out her anger on the boys on the sports team. When they began pleading with her for mercy, she sprayed them with a water hose, saying they needed to cool off. Hao Yi hid behind a tree, watching the scene, and Mei, who was with him, commented that Xuan was no ordinary girl. Unable to bear their suffering anymore, Hao Yi intervened, or rather tried to, and that caused Xuan to get soaked. Instead of cursing him out or trying to beat him up, she called him a shameless skirt chaser and walked off with her remaining dignity. The boys gathered around him and thanked him for saving them, but warned him to watch his back, as Xuan's behavior was very odd. The next day, Hao Yi woke to his alarm and his mother screaming at him to get up. Unfortunately, Shu Welly was lying in bed with him, and when she heard him say he was late, she asked what kind of plans he had. Hao Yi claimed he was going to buy some reference books, but because she didn't believe him, she locked him in the room and said she would get the books for him. When she got downstairs, she told his parents that he had decided to stay in and study, and told them not to open the door for him. His mother immediately realized what was happening and asked her husband if he wouldn't try to help their son. This led to an argument, so Hao Yi's cries for help went unnoticed. As a last resort, Hao Yi had to escape through his balcony and ended up scaring the little girl next door, who screamed that a cultured guy was trying to get her. Nevertheless, Hao Yi made it to the cafe and met Zitong, who was starting to think he wouldn't show up because of crazy Shu Welly. Unfortunately, the whole date was awkward as hell because Zitong didn't know what to say and had expected an elaborate confession of love. As they both sat wallowing in their thoughts, Zitong grew flustered, so Hao Yi touched her head, thinking she had a fever. This made things between them even more awkward, and just as they were drowning in it, Hao Yi noticed an anime convention nearby and suggested they attend it. Meanwhile, Shu Welly had just discovered that Jang Hao Yi had pulled a prison break, so she decided to turn into a bounty hunter and find him. Back at the convention center, the otakas were going crazy over a trio of cosplayers, who were letting them take photos of them. The girls seemed to smile as they posed happily, but they were busy discussing another cosplayer, whom they wanted to crush. At the same time, Hao Yi and Zitong were walking around awkwardly when Hao Yi spotted Xuan cosplaying as a cat maid. Neither of them was pleased to see the other, and as Xuan tried to stop the photo shoot, her fans grew even more worked up. As if that wasn't bad enough, Xuan saw her girls approaching, so she grabbed her unexpected guests and ran to the changing room to avoid being seen. Outside, Shu Welly had just arrived, and she was dragging a ridiculously long sword with her. Since it was an anime convention, those around assumed she was only cosplaying, unaware that she was there to unalive an unsuspecting idiot. Back inside, Xuan successfully avoided being seen by her friends, but that only meant she now had the time to scream at Hao Yi. The boy tried to calm her down by complimenting her, but Xuan was too pissed to believe him. In her anger, she told him why she was hiding her love of cosplay from her friends. It turned out that when she first enrolled at the college, she had noticed how badly the guys on the sports team treated the girls. They mocked and bullied them because of their appearance, and when she couldn't take it anymore, she stepped in. Ever since then, the girls had looked up to her, so she couldn't bring herself to tell them that she loved cosplaying. To her, that would be like acknowledging that she dressed up to please guys when she went around acting like a glorified man-hater. Hao Yi didn't feel the least bit sorry for Xuan and told her that if she told the truth, she wouldn't have to live a double life anymore. That statement pissed Xuan off, and as she began insulting him for being insensitive, an announcement cut her off. They were calling for cosplayers to sign up for the cosplay competition, but Xuan said she wasn't participating. When asked why, she explained that it was a group event and that she'd come solo. Suddenly, Zitong told Xuan that she had 2 willing participants standing before her. Hao Yi tried to remove himself from the equation, but Xuan wasn't about to miss the golden opportunity. Before he could run away, he was pulled into a dressing room and put through a gruesome experience. Through it all, no one realized that Shu Welly had found them and was lurking outside the door like a vengeful wraith. By the time they were done with Hao Yi, he was dressed in a pink maid's costume, a blonde wig, and bunny ears. When he saw his reflection in the mirror, he tried to tap into his inner femininity, but he just couldn't get past the horrible wig. While he mourned his unwanted change, Shu Welly snapped a photo of him from one of the changing booths and began drooling over it like a creep. Suddenly, Xuan let out a yelp, and when Zitong and Hao Yi went to check on her, they found her clutching her ripped costume. It was clearly sabotage, but Hao Yi stupidly said it was an accident and told her just to use the costume she was wearing. His words pissed Xuan off, and when he tried to apologize, she refused to listen and ran out crying. The 3 cosplayers from earlier were hiding at the end of the hallway, and it became obvious that they were responsible for ruining the costume. Unaware of the 3 witches behind them, Hao Yi told Zitong how sorry he felt for Xuan. However, he decided to help her win the contest, so he grabbed Zitong and rushed to find Xuan. At some point, he went to the bathroom to relieve himself, and that was when Mei found him. Hao Yi complained that she was invading his privacy, but then he forgot about that when she asked why he'd been mumbling to himself. Hao Yi explained that he needed to help Xuan win the contest, but he didn't know how. Suddenly, an idea came to him, and he told Mei that she would help him carry it out. Soon, it was time for the first part of the competition, and as he walked onto the stage, he got so nervous that he tripped. This prompted the audience to boo him, but Hao Yi easily turned things around and had them fawning over him. Xuan's haters stood backstage, talking about how it didn't matter whether the audience liked him. What mattered most was the group performance. On the other hand, Hao Yi hoped that Mei and Zitong would find Xuan before they had to go on for the second half of the contest. A few minutes later, he tried to convince the host to give him more time, but the host said he'd already given his team enough time, so they had to go on next or be disqualified. Left with no choice, Hao Yi walked back on stage, but the audience only wanted to see Xuan. He tried to do some crowd control by singing, but that just pissed them off. Seeing this, the 3 girls began gloating, saying they had better get off the stage while his dignity was still intact. Still, Hao Yi stood his ground and decided to address the crowd. He gave a heartfelt speech about how he was only competing because of his friend, whose hobby he had just discovered. Unknown to him, Xuan was standing above him, and his words moved her. When he called out to her and asked her to return, she instinctively moved forward, and the railing snapped off. As she fell, everyone grew worried, but Mei stepped in and acted like a fairy godmother. Her magic not only saved Xuan but also transformed her and Hao Yi's costumes, turning them into a demon and a bride. The crowd went crazy at the sight of this transformation, and Zitong wished she were the one in Hao Yi's arms. As for Xuan, she got pissed at Hao Yi and demanded to know how he'd switched their outfit because she didn't believe he knew how to do magic. Backstage, Shu Welly was boiling over in rage, as she disliked how Hao Yi had held on to Yang Xuan so tightly in front of a large crowd. Just as she decided to walk on stage and cut her rival down, she overheard the haters discussing how to get Hao Yi on their side and turned on them instead. Later, when Hao Yi and Xuan went to change outfits, they argued over who should go first. Suddenly, the fictional clock struck 12, and their magic clothes disappeared, leaving them in their birthday suits. Xuan grew embarrassed, believing Hao Yi had done it on purpose, so she slapped him and threw him out of the room with his clothes. Mei happened to show up just then, and Hao Yi began screaming at her for putting him in that mess. The girl didn't hear a word he said because her eyes were glued to his swinging pendulums. Eventually, she got so traumatized that she covered her eyes and screamed at him to get dressed. Hao Yi reminded her that she wouldn't have seen his goods if she'd mentioned earlier that her magic had a time limit, so she humbly apologized. While he got dressed, she explained that the clothes had disappeared because she had panicked while casting the spell. Apparently, she had the worst grade in class. But Hao Yi just brushed her words aside and said that if it hadn't been for her, things would have turned out differently. Mei hadn't expected him to thank her, so she just stood there blushing. Just then, Zitong came to ask Hao Yi if he was ready to head home. And he said yes. He asked Xuan if she wanted them to wait for her, but she screamed at him to get lost and grew sad when he actually did. However, when she went out later, she found Hao Yi waiting for her. He wanted to confirm whether the spell over her was broken, so he invited her to spend the night at his place. Xuan's response was to slap him and run off, leaving him very pleased that he didn't have to deal with her feelings anymore. However, he couldn't help but wonder when she'd stop acting like a tsundere and show her true self to those who cared about her. Hoping to help her, he visited his teacher, Miss Jiran, to ask for her assistance. The woman immediately teased him after opening the door, but Zhang Hao Yi was already so used to it that he was practically immune to her actions. That was until he walked in and spotted her plot covers lying on the sofa. Once he'd calmed down, he looked around the apartment and found a lot of dirty dishes. There was also no food in the fridge, and it made him wonder how the woman was surviving. Jiran didn't really care for his side comments, but she knew he had a reason for visiting, so she asked if Shu Welli was back to bullying him. She referred to the crazy girl as his girlfriend, and he denied it, reminding her that they only grew up together. Surprisingly, Shu Welli was actually a sweet girl growing up, but she did a complete 360 when she realized that no matter what she did, she couldn't beat Hao Yi in school. She started beating him up every chance she got, so to save himself and appease her, Hao Yi began failing on purpose. That was until the summer, when she tried to force him to move to America with him. Hao Yi told her he didn't want to go, so she told him that if she scored higher on the upcoming tests, he would have to travel with her. So he did what any man tired of being controlled would do. He fought back and took first place. While everyone at school was surprised, Shu Welli accused him of hating her. When he tried to explain, she started crying and told him he would regret his decision. She then ran off, and that was the last time he saw her until she showed up days ago, trying to turn him into a eunuch. The teacher sympathized with him and asked what he was planning to do. Hao Yi told her he would take the top spot at school and asked that she support him. Intrigued, the woman asked which girl he was going up against this time, but Hao Yi didn't respond, so she tried to tease the answer out of him. Still, Hao Yi resisted her temptation and swore he was only trying to help his friend. Eventually, she gave up and dozed off on his leg because she had a little too much to drink. The following day, as Hao Yi left her apartment, Jiran said goodbye to him like he was her man, drawing everyone's attention to him. So the poor, embarrassed boy ended up doing the walk, or rather the run, of shame to school. During that time, Xuan was tormenting the boys in the sports team at the gym. However, when Zhang Hao Yi suddenly showed up, she panicked and tried to take him outside, but he refused, saying he'd come to make a bet with the entire team. Everyone grew confused, but Hao Yi just smirked and told them that if he beat all of them in the upcoming midterms, Xuan had to do whatever he asked. Hearing this, they were all convinced that Hao Yi had taken some premium grass before coming to school that morning. He was currently ranked 153rd in their year, while one of the girls was ranked 10th, but Hao Yi was unfazed. Once the girls accepted his challenge, he turned away and told them he'd be back to gloat in a week. From that day forward, he threw himself into his studies, and when Zitong heard about the bet, she kept watch over him from afar. On the night before the exams, it was raining heavily, and Hao Yi was about to go to bed when he spotted Shu Welli standing underneath a tree. Worried, he rushed downstairs to check on her, and when she saw him, she rushed into his arms. She was shaking, but not from the cold, and as she cried into Hao Yi's shirt, she told him that someone had returned. The next day, Hao Yi showed up at school looking very tired, which worried Zitong. However, when she asked if he was sure he could take the test in that state, he replied that it would be a walk in the park. Just then, Xuan showed up with her friends, and she tried to convince him to drop the bet, but her friends said it was too late. Hao Yi didn't even respond, and as he walked to class, Xuan's worry intensified. When it was time for the test, Hao Yi was very focused, and even Jiran couldn't help but look at him with pride. The boy was so sure of his answers that he even turned in his answer sheets before everyone else, prompting one of Xuan's friends to say that he gave up. At the end of the day, Xuan tried to approach Hao Yi, but Zitong beat her to it, so she walked away sadly. Meanwhile, Hao Yi asked his companion to help him pick out an outfit, making her wonder if he had a hot date or something. A few days later, Hao Yi showed up at the gym holding a maid's costume and told Xuan to wear it for the rest of the week. Everyone was convinced he'd bumped his head that morning, but he assured them that he was fine, explaining that he was only cashing in on the bet. As they argued with him, the results went live on the school website, and everyone was shocked to see Hao Yi in first place. He then handed the outfit to Xuan, but the girls accused him of cheating to fulfill his cultured desires through their captain. Hao Yi assured them that he'd won fair and square and was about to say something else when Xuan cut him off to say she would wear the outfit. On his way out, he told her that there was nothing wrong with dressing up like a maid, and that's when she realized the reason behind the bet. Later on, Xuan's friends went to the teachers to find out if Hao Yi's results were a mistake. The man assured them it wasn't, and even Ji Ran vouched for Hao Yi, saying he had earned his results properly. After the girls left, the male teacher pointed out how crazy it was for Hao Yi to go from 153rd to 1st, but Ji Ran didn't bother saying anything to him. The other students also found it strange, but they forgot all about Hao Yi when they learned that Xuan was dressed as a maid. She was handing out flyers for the sports department, but the cosplay simps were just there to gawk at her in all her maid-chan glory. When Hao Yi arrived, he asked why she wasn't wearing the outfit he had selected. Xuan immediately grew flustered and told him she would make him pay, but the clueless guy had no idea why. And honestly, he didn't care as he advised her to do her best and pushed her towards her adoring fans. Later on the rooftop, Hao Yi asked Mei if his strategy to help Xuan come out to her friends would work. The Cupid honestly told him that she wasn't sure, causing him to start lamenting that he put in all that effort for nothing. Just then, Zitong spoke up from beside him, so he jumped away and assured her that he was feeling fine. Before she could ask follow-up questions, Xuan showed up and threw the maid's outfit he had prepared in his face. She angrily told him it was too small and wondered if he'd chosen it to embarrass her. Zitong tried to explain that she'd chosen the outfit, but then she got too scared and left Hao Yi to face Xuan's wrath alone. In the end, she revealed she wasn't even that mad, and as she turned to walk away, she said she was happy he made her wear the outfit. The next day, as Hao Yi walked down the hallway, Mei was right beside him, wanting to know who Xu Welli had been talking about the other day. He nonchalantly answered that it was her ex-boyfriend, which surprised the Cupid because she'd assumed that Hao Yi was the love of Xu Welli's life. As she hounded him for the tea, Hao Yi was suddenly tackled by a boy and a girl who called him dad. He quickly told them they had the wrong guy, but Yuan assured him they didn't. The shock had his soul trying to ascend to the heavens, but Mei stopped him, saying he couldn't go get milk like that. Once he returned to his body, Yuan asked how he could forget his family in just a few days. Hao Yi didn't know how to respond, but when that incompetent Cupid exclaimed that she understood what was happening, he screamed at her to shut up. Yuan assumed he was speaking to her, so he quickly explained that he wasn't, and the girl shyly asked if he would finally return him that night. His son cut him off before he could respond, so he asked them to go with their mom and wait for him by the school gates. He also told them to address him as uncle when they were outside, and the twins agreed. Once they were gone, they popped off on Mei, so she explained that sometimes the magic works a little too well. In other words, it turned Yuan's delusions into reality, so the twins were very real. Could only scream because unless he fulfilled Yuan's desires, he was stuck being a deadbeat dad. Meanwhile, Yuan and the twins were outside when she got a call and asked them to wait for her. However, the boy didn't do as he was told, and after he ran off, his sister chased after him, trying to bring him back. A few minutes later, Yuan found Hao Yi and informed him that the twins were missing. He immediately asked her to go to the gate and wait in case they returned, then rushed off to find them. During that time, Zitong found the girl crying by one of the buildings and comforted her. The girl told her she was looking for her uncle. Meanwhile, her brother was causing trouble around campus. Hao Yi managed to track him down, but the only problem was that he went into the girls' changing room. As Hao Yi tried to figure out how to get him out, Xuan spotted him and immediately assumed he was there peeping on the girls. The news that Hao Yi had been caught watching girls change immediately spread, and when Zitong heard it, she grew worried. Inside the building, Hao Yi was cornered, and when he tried to plead his case, his son rushed forward, saying he'd save him. Unfortunately, he slipped and accidentally pulled down Xuan's dress, giving all the creeps gathered a good view of her plots. When people realized he was the one causing trouble on campus, they began scolding him, but Hao Yi pleaded with them to just let it go. At that moment, Zitong arrived with the girl, and they witnessed Hao Yi get a royal beatdown from the angry girls. A while later, Hao Yi took the twins back to their mother, and she was very grateful to him. Mei also showed up and congratulated Hao Yi for not being a useless father. Ignoring her, Hao Yi drew Yuan's attention to the twins and pointed out how absurd it was that they were their parents. Unfortunately, Yuan was so deep in her delusions that she saw nothing wrong with it. Mei then told Hao Yi that if he didn't resolve the issue soon, Yuan wouldn't be the only one affected by her delusions. Because of that, Hao Yi decided to go home with Yuan and the twins to assess the situation there. When they arrived, Hao Yi was welcomed by a knife which his supposed mother-in-law threw at him. Hao Yi instantly realized that her memories had been altered as well, so he tried to smooth things out with her. Thankfully, Yu-won got his mom off his case, and they all went in for dinner as a family. Meanwhile, Zitong was home, wondering if it was okay to call Hao Yi and asked him out on a date that Sunday, because she kept thinking of him. The guy sneezed while helping Yu-won with the dishes, and she assumed he'd gotten a cold. The twins joked about her giving him a healing kiss, and Yu-won grew flustered as she told them off for saying naughty things. Her mother was on the twins' side, but she told Yu-won she was going out to exercise and advised the couple not to wait up for her. Shortly after, Hao Yi helped the twins with their homework, and then Yu-won instructed them to go to bed. When she began undressing to take a shower, Hao Yi respectfully excused himself and went to sit in the living room. But it didn't help that she walked in a few minutes later, wearing a skimpy nightgown. He tried not to look at her, but failed miserably, leaving inappropriate images of Yu-won flying through his head. Just before he could do something stupid, Zitong called to invite him on a date to the amusement park that Sunday. Hao Yi didn't think twice before saying yes. However, after he got off the call, Yu-won suddenly asked him to take the twins to the same park on that same day, and he immediately went into crisis mode. His angel advised him to call Zitong back and cancel, but his demon argued that being with a rich heiress was the better option. As they argued, he slammed his hands together to get rid of them, and in the end, he agreed to take the twins and Yu-won to the park. On his way home later, he called Zitong to cancel, but when he recalled what her housekeeper said about Zitong being alone all the time, he changed his mind. The girl was already crying because she was being turned down, but Hao Yi salvaged the situation by asking what time they should meet. When Hao Yi arrived at the park with his family around 8:50 a.m., since he had to meet Zitong by 10 a.m., he spent the next hour going on rides that made him feel sick just because the twins liked them. While he was puking his guts out later, Mei dumped a boatload of candies and chocolates on him, saying that life was too short not to eat sweets. This earned her a scolding, but she was practically immune to them now, and when he told her that he was meeting Zitong in 10 minutes, she asked if he needed a wingman. Hao Yi said he didn't need help from a failed Cupid, as he'd already planned everything out. He then ran off, and after some unnecessary spy moves, he finally met Zitong in another part of the park. She was wearing a hat which matched her outfit, so Hao Yi took a moment to admire her beauty before settling down to cool off. Zitong told him she had something important to tell him, and he instantly clocked that she wanted to confess her love. However, they slipped back into their awkwardness, and Zitong began struggling to speak at all. Just as she finally mustered up the courage, a guy walked up to them and asked if he could take their photo. The park was doing a street photography thing, and he thought they looked cute together. That was until the two decided to pose as if they were about to take part in a military parade. To salvage the situation, he encouraged them to move closer and try a more intimate pose. This made Zitong a bit bolder, and she hugged Hao Yi, causing the guy to heat up like a kettle. Just as the shoot began, the wind tried to steal Zitong's hat away, but Hao Yi grabbed it just in time. This action made Zitong so grateful that she pushed up on her toes to kiss him, and the guy ended up in the bathroom trying to cool down. Mei followed him as usual and called him the densest fool to walk the planet, as it was obvious that Zitong liked him, but he was still in denial. Hao Yi argued that the chocolate's magic was still affecting Zitong, but Mei said it wasn't. She also pointed out that his raw charm was pulling the girls to him and said it was only a matter of time before he became a true harem king. Later, while Hao Yi was trying to find a present for the twins, he bumped into his friend Dong, and the two started chatting. Dong informed him that Xu Welli's ex, Yuze, was back from the States, but this wasn't news to Hao Yi. Still, Dong believed that Yuze returned to hurt Xu Welli and pleaded with Hao Yi to watch over her. Hao Yi wasn't interested in becoming Xu Welli's unpaid bodyguard, so he asked Dong to do it himself since he had a crush on Xu Welli. His friend said he wasn't that much of a scoundrel to move in on his friend's girl because he was convinced Xu Welli and Hao Yi would have been a couple if Yuze hadn't been in the picture. Just then, Hao Yi spotted Xuan with her friends, who suddenly accused him of stalking Xuan. Hao Yi told them to get their delusions under control, but then he got a call from Zitong and panicked. Believe it or not, the idiot had forgotten they were on a date. However, he needed to return to Yuan and the twins, so he pleaded with Xuan for help and sent her to hang out with Zitong in his place. When reunited with Yuan and the twins, he discovered that his daughter was unhappy. Yuan explained that she had failed to win an ice cream for her brother in a painting contest. Hao Yi said he'd buy them some ice cream, but Yuan told him not to bother, saying they needed to spend wisely because he'd recently lost his job. When she went back to comfort the twins, Hao Yi couldn't help but feel sorry for her because even though the situation wasn't real, she was still living through it. So he decided to put smiles on their faces and told the twins that he would win them ice cream. The next contest was a quiz, and Hao Yi answered all the questions correctly, earning an ice cream voucher. Later, at the ice cream parlor, Yuan thanked him for making the day memorable, even though he was broke. Hao Yi told her it was his duty as their father, which made her say he was similar to someone. Hao Yi immediately assumed the person was connected to Yuan's deepest desire and decided to find out who it was so he could break the curse. A few minutes later, Zitong and Xuan got off a bus right across from the ice cream parlor, and while they were teasing themselves, they noticed Hao Yi standing with Yuan and the twins. Once he was alone, Xuan demanded an explanation, but didn't even give him a chance to speak. She dragged him into the bathroom, beat him up, and strung him up like a freshly slaughtered pig ready for delivery. She then accused him of two-timing Zidong, but Hao Yi swore that he'd run into Lin Yuan and the twins by accident. Xuan obviously didn't believe him and asked why Yuan had been teary-eyed before she left with the twins. It so happened that he'd asked Yuan if her father had abandoned her, hoping to find out her deepest desire. But the question had pissed her off, and since he could do no wrong in her eyes, she ended up crying out of frustration. When the girls heard the story, they felt bad for Yuan and assumed that the twins were her siblings. Xuan warned Hao Yi never to speak without thinking again and agreed to let him go because he'd convinced them that everything was a misunderstanding. However, Zitong pleaded with Hao Yi to help Yuan in any way he could, and Hao Yi promised to do so. After he left, Xuan asked Zitong if she was okay with sending her date to another woman. Zitong explained that Hao Yi was the type to go above and beyond for those he cared about, so it wouldn't feel right to stop him. That evening, Hao Yi found Yuan and apologized for what he said at the ice cream parlor. Yuan assured him that she wasn't angry, as she understood that he was only trying to help her. Feeling relieved, he called the photographer from earlier and asked him to take a group photo of them. After that, he took them home, and Yuan warned him never to repeat what he said to her in front of her mother. Hao Yi swore he wouldn't because he loved his life. Still, after Yuan walked away, he suddenly recalled what Mei had told him about false memories being connected to a person's past. So, the next day, he visited Yuan's old school to find clues that could help him, only to get in trouble with half the staff. As he tried to escape their wrath, he bumped into a pair of bouncy plots and got whacked in the head like a mole. Thankfully, the issue was resolved, and the woman was also Yuan's former homeroom teacher. She told him that Yuan's father used to bring her to school every day and never missed pickup time. However, after divorcing his wife, he stopped doing school runs, and Yuan was never the same again. After hearing the story, Hao Yi pleaded with the teacher for Yuan's father's address, but she couldn't help him. So he decided to take matters into his own hands and went to the police station. He happened to know a guy there, but unfortunately, Yuan's family registration didn't list her father. Hao Yi left feeling disappointed, but his guy kept digging and uncovered something which left him speechless. When Hao Yi arrived home a while later, he found his parents looking like something bad had happened. As he pressed him for answers, his father told him to prepare for what was to come, which only confused him further. He asked if he should call the police, but at that moment, Xu Weli walked in and began dragging him to his room because it had been a while since they had any alone time. He pleaded with his parents to save him, but all his father said was that his willpower was about to be tested and that he shouldn't fail. Once he was locked in with Xu Weli, she told him they were going to consummate their marriage, and Hao Yi began screaming like she'd given the order for his execution. Zhang Hao Yi cried out for his parents to save him, but when they didn't lift a finger, he ran into the bathroom and remained there until Xu Weli fell asleep hours later. When he came out and saw her sleeping, he thought to himself that she looked cute, but then the girl made a face, which reminded him that she was still a nutjob. He then sat down by the bed and took out the family photo from the park because he couldn't get over how happy they had been. Just then, his contact at the police station called him and said he found 16 possible phone numbers for Yuan's dad. Hao Yi instantly grew excited and asked him to send them over. Unfortunately, his voice woke Xu Weli up, and she began tormenting him again. In the end, he slept for only 2 hours, and while they were at school, the she-devil promised that their second night would be even better. Those who heard her turned on Hao Yi because they couldn't understand how a loser like him was pulling all the baddies. Yuan watched the whole thing unfold, feeling disappointed that he'd returned to his skirt-chasing ways barely 24 hours after making up with her. Eventually, after Hao Yi was finally set free, he began calling the number he got, hoping that one of them belonged to Yuan's dad. The last one was the lucky number, but the man refused to pick up, so Hao Yi decided to let him be and catch some Z's. On his way home later, he called the number again, and this time Yuan's father answered. He quickly introduced himself as Yuan's husband and asked the man to return so he could meet his grandbabies. Yuan's father tried to come up with excuses to avoid honoring the invitation, but Hao Yi wouldn't let him. Left with no choice, the man revealed that he wasn't actually Yuan's father. This revelation stopped Hao Yi in his tracks, and he didn't care that he was in the middle of the street. Mei asked him to stop investigating the issue, but he didn't respond. Instead, he went to Yuan's place, determined to speak to her mother, but when he arrived, he overheard the mother and daughter arguing about the man in question. Yuan ended up running out after her mother told her that her father was dead. The twins chased after her, but Hao Yi remained so he could speak to her mom. The woman wasn't interested in speaking to him and grew even angrier when he mentioned Yuan's dad. Still, Hao Yi kept banging on the door, hoping that she would open up and answer him. It was the arrival of an old neighbor that made him stop, and after speaking to her, he felt worse than before. When Mei showed up later, he told her that he didn't think he could handle the situation again. It turned out that on the day Yu-won's parents were supposed to get married, her father got called away for urgent police business and died in action. The person Yu-won grew to know as her father had pursued her mom in the past, and he didn't mind that she wasn't his. Sadly, his parents opposed the marriage, and even though he tried to be there for his family, Mr. Lin eventually caved to the pressure and asked for a divorce. Mei felt sorry for the family after hearing the story, but Hao Yi said he didn't care anymore. He believed the adults were all responsible for the mess, especially Yu-won's adoptive father, for being too much of a coward to stand up to his parents. Mei couldn't believe Hao Yi could say something so heartless, but the boy was truly done and began walking away. Mei immediately went after him, trying to explain that the adults had done what they could, but fate was still cruel to them. Despite hearing this, Hao Yi angrily told Mei to leave him alone and stormed off in another direction. His sudden change in behavior left the Cupid confused, but she couldn't figure out what had gone wrong. Later, when Hao Yi arrived home, he lashed out at his parents and locked himself up in his room. He trashed the place, only stopping when he spotted the family photo from the park, because guilt hit him hard. He even admitted that his anger was a bit misplaced and apologized for fighting with Mei. When he mentioned he had to make things right, Mei appeared, and even though she scared him, they ended up laughing. The next day, Hao Yi called Yu-won's adoptive father again and tried to convince him to return to his family, but the man hung up. Later that week, Hao Yi went with Yu-won to pick the twins up from school, and on the way home, Truck Kun suddenly showed up to isekai Yu-won. The ambulance arrived shortly after, and while transporting the injured to the hospital, it drove past Zitong's car. She was having a father-daughter moment with her dad when she suddenly got a call, and the car was immediately turned around. Shortly after, Hao Yi called Mr. Lin and informed him that Yu-won had been in an accident. The man immediately dashed out of his office, and when the elevators were taking too long, he took the stairs, praying he would make it in time to see his little girl. Unfortunately, he was in another city, and since there weren't any available flights, he had to pull a Fast and Furious. By the time he arrived at the hospital, it was already nighttime, and when he asked the nurse which room his daughter was in, she informed him that they didn't have a patient with that name. Refusing to believe her, he rushed to find Yu-won by himself and ran into a doctor who had just come out of surgery. The doctor informed him that they had lost the patient, so Mr. Lin assumed his daughter was gone. As he began mourning her loss, Yu-won suddenly showed up behind him, and they were both shocked to see each other. The girl tearfully ran into her father's arms, telling him how much she missed him and had waited for him to return to her. It turned out that Hao Yi had been hurt in the accident, even though Mei had intervened with her powers. While he was passed out, the twins came to him in his dreams and said their goodbyes to him after promising to keep watching over him. When he woke up later, he found Yu-won by his bed and promised to buy her another pair of glasses when he got better. A month later, Hao Yi was released from the hospital, but was almost sent back because of Shu Welly. While he was rebuking her, the other girls also arrived, saying that they had come to take him home. They all gave off a menacing aura, which made him fear for his life, but then Shu Welly stepped in. She told the girls that she was the only one with the right to take Hao Yi home, since she was his wife, but they asked why they hadn't been invited to the wedding. Hao Yi tried to slip away during the confrontation, but Shu Welly's men grabbed him, and she got into the car shortly after. During the drive, he cried out for Mei to save him, but the Cupid was taking a break since his love issue had been resolved. Or so she thought, because right before her eyes, a girl suddenly showed up and began cursing Hao Yi. However, in her usual fashion, Mei forgot about the girl, and the next day she went shopping for snacks. While trying to figure out what to get, a young boy spotted her and rushed towards her. Mei was surprised by the sudden approach and immediately froze time, then plotted her escape route. The little boy was left confused when time unfroze, and the pretty fairy lady was nowhere to be seen. Meanwhile, Mei was on her way to Hao Yi's place when she spotted a couple in the middle of a lover's spat. She tried using her powers to help them make up, but she only made things worse, and she realized that her powers were being affected because Hao Yi hadn't resolved all his love problems. Speaking of Hao Yi, his 4 women were on their way to bring him some soup when they ran into each other in the hallway. Shu Welly tried to assert her dominance, but the others wouldn't allow her to take the spotlight. Suddenly, they heard Hao Yi cry out in pain, and the ever-violent Shu Welly kicked the door down so she could defend her man. However, they were surprised to find a towel-clad Hao Yi hunched over in the chair, with Dong standing right behind him. Not surprisingly, they immediately assumed the two were up to plot stuff, and even the neighbors' twins came in to take photos of their uncles being all fruity. The boys tried to explain it was all a misunderstanding, but the girls didn't listen, and Shuan even hit Hao Yi on the head with her bento box. When they eventually calmed down, Hao Yi asked Dong to accompany him to his room to get dressed. While they were there, Dong asked Hao Yi why he didn't just date Shu Welly, now that she was single, but Hao Yi refused. He said they were better off as friends and refused to discuss the matter further, so Dong left him alone to finish dressing. However, he couldn't do that in peace because May dumped her snack stash on him and then began crying about how her powers were acting all funny. Her cries drifted out of the room and were heard by Shu Welly, who came to check on Hao Yi. As expected, she kicked the door down and began searching for the girl Hao Yi was supposedly hiding. He told her he was alone and tried to persuade her to leave, but Shu Welly was determined to find May. The others soon came in, and when they noticed how Hao Yi was acting, Shuan immediately deduced that another girl was involved. The boy swore on his life that they were mistaken and tried to get them to leave, but Shu Welly spotted May's dress and yanked on it. May was shocked that they could see her and had to come out of hiding so she could use her powers to settle the problem. However, instead of freezing time, she kept changing their outfits, prompting the cultured Hao Yi to get a nosebleed. When Xuan saw this, she grew embarrassed and punched him in the face. Later, after May had successfully wiped their memories and it was just her and Hao Yi, she continued to complain to him about her powers. However, he wasn't interested and was about to walk away when he heard his name being called on the television. The person who said it was an idol named Sandy, but according to the reporter, Sandy had been in a coma for weeks now, and that was her last broadcast. As they tried to figure out how Sandy knew Hao Yi, they were suddenly transported to an icy area. Hao Yi thought it was May's doing, but the Cupid swore that she hadn't done anything. Suddenly, they heard someone singing, and when the person revealed themselves, they were shocked to see that it was Sandy. She told Yuan that she'd come to see him because he didn't come to see her, and the boy's shock doubled. May pointed out that Sandy had also eaten the chocolate and explained that the magic granted the eater's desires. Sandy was practically a magic girl now. Hao Yi couldn't believe his luck but then asked Sandy curiously who he was to her. The girl responded, but nothing, she said, gave him a definite answer, and the next moment, they were transported to the school rooftop. May advised Hao Yi to go along with Sandy if he didn't want any trouble, so he took the idol's hand and jumped off the roof with her. He initially thought he was going to go splat on the ground, but was surprised when a giant paper plane caught him and began showing him the world like he was Aladdin. There were sea creatures all around them, and when May caught up, she told Hao Yi they were in Sandy's imagination. This prompted him to ask Sandy again who he was to her, and she revealed that he was the person who had stood by her from the very beginning. Apparently, he was also the one who convinced her to become an idol, and he still didn't leave her side. Hao Yi told her she had mistaken him for someone else, but Sandy assured him she hadn't and hugged him before continuing the tour. After a while, she dropped him in a park, and the boy asked May when the multiverse tour would end. She told him it was up to Sandy and explained how magic and desire worked for everyone. Just then, Sandy lashed onto his arm and told him it was time for them to go to the fancy world. Hao Yi became conflicted because he didn't know what would happen if he walked through the portal, and since he didn't want to make Sandy mad, he suggested they get some ice cream instead. However, the ice cream date turned into an aquarium date when Hao Yi mentioned there were lots of jellyfish there. The only difference was that they were in the tank with the fish, but thankfully, they could breathe. Hao Yi was left in awe of the things Sandy could do and admitted to himself that her world was very beautiful, even though no one else could see it. Suddenly, she spotted some dolphins and made Hao Yi swim to the surface so they could take them back. Hao Yi told her not to, and when she kept insisting, he scolded her, calling her a selfish brat. Sandy began to cry and asked if he would go to the fancy world with her. When he refused, the world around them crumbled, and he grew worried that he had hurt her feelings, so he promised to visit the fancy world with her the next day. When he returned to the real world, he told May about his promise, and the Cupid insisted he shouldn't go through with it. She explained that what he'd seen was Sandy's spirit, and that if she went to the fancy world, she would die. Hao Yi admitted he knew this, but explained that Sandy definitely had a reason for wanting to go to the fancy world. He believed that something bad had happened to her in the real world and she didn't want to face it anymore, which was why she created another world. He believed that if he accompanied her, she would open up to him and they could finally help her. That night, when Hao Yi walked into his room, he found Sandy waiting for him. She came to give him a copy of her songs, saying he'd inspired her to write them. Hao Yi didn't want to accept it, but Sandy said she wouldn't take it back. She also said she couldn't wait to go to the fancy world because she would have much more freedom and more listeners. After she left, May showed up and asked if they were really going to allow Sandy to die. He assured her he wouldn't and asked for her help in carrying out the plan he devised. A little later, he found Sandy about to pass through the portal and stopped her. The girl was very excited to see him, only to become disappointed when he said he'd come to take her back. However, Hao Yi didn't back down and asked why she was trying to leave the real world. At that moment, her manager and agent were discussing how her hospitalization was costing them a lot, and the worst part was that the doctors weren't sure she would wake up. Back at the tree, Hao Yi tried to convince Sandy that no matter where she went, there would still be things which she wouldn't like. Sandy didn't want to accept it, and because of that, her body began reacting violently in the hospital. The more her spirit struggled against Hao Yi's words, the more her body rocked. In the end, she ran into the portal, and Hao Yi went after her. The portal led to a dark void filled with old things, and when he spotted Sandy, she was crying her eyes out. She also couldn't believe that the world she longed for was nothing but a void, and Hao Yi feared that his words had messed with her imagination. Hoping to salvage the situation, he held out his hand to her and asked her to come with him. Almost immediately, the place lit up, and film stretching as far as the eye could see appeared. Hao Yi then reintroduced himself to Sandy, telling her about himself and the girls in his life, including Mei. Hearing about the love goddess, Sandy decided to return, and Hao Yi grew excited. A few moments later, they were back outside the tree, so Hao Yi told Sandy that he had a plan, but she had to answer all his questions honestly. Later that day, he called Yu Wan to help him with the other part of his plan, writing an article questioning the cause of Sandy's accident. Then he had Zitong post it to all her followers, and the girl took it a step further by having her employees continue reposting and leaving comments under the post. This made the post start trending, and everyone who saw it became interested in Sandy. Hao Yi then used Xuan's popularity at school to rally Sandy's fans to start a protest at her company. However, that was only the beginning, and Hao Yi told Mei he would search for Sandy's true sweetheart. The guy had already heard the news, but he tried to convince himself that it wasn't his business. That was until Hao Yi found him and forced him to admit he had been in a relationship with Sandy. However, he claimed that Sandy had hurt him and that he wanted nothing to do with her. Hearing how selfish he sounded, Hao Yi almost lost it and told him that he was the reason Sandy was on the brink of death. In the end, the guy broke down and started apologizing, so Hao Yi asked him to explain his side of the story on record. He told Hao Yi that they had grown up together and that Sandy had always been talented. Her talent helped her get scouted easily, and as her fame grew, she had to withdraw from school. He became her private tutor and the only person she could rely on because her agency forbade her from interacting with others. However, his life was soon affected by it, as people viewed Sandy as a freak, and since she spoke only to him, they also considered him one. While he was in that dark place, her agent paid his mom a large sum to convince Sandy to do what they wanted, and he played the role of the deceiver very well. This led to Sandy being even more restricted by her agent and her company. As for him, he reached the point where he couldn't stomach the things her agent wanted, so when it was time to renew his contract, he tore it and told the guy to go to hell. While he complained about how his life was ruined too, he didn't know that Sandy was outside listening, and that broke her. Later, Hao Yi took the recording to confront the agent, but the guy didn't think he could do him any harm. Suddenly, he received a call informing him that Sandy's parents wouldn't renew her contract. This made the guy panic, so he asked Hao Yi to name his price. Hao Yi said he only wanted Sandy's freedom, but the guy said Sandy ought to be grateful he let her shine as much as she did. He then got up to leave, but Hao Yi told him not to be so hasty and threw down an envelope. It contained photos of the guy and his mistress, and Hao Yi reminded him that his wife was a top executive at his company. If she found out, it would be very bad for him, so he was forced to give in to Hao Yi's demands. A few days later, Zitong was in her room wondering what reward she would get from Hao Yi when the news of Sandy waking up from her coma came on. The reporters tried to interview her, but the idol threw a tantrum, demanding that Hao Yi come see her. The next day, since everyone wanted to know who Hao Yi was, he had to sneak into the hospital and create a diversion just so he could see Sandy without the reporters spotting him. Sandy was so happy to see him, and as they talked, she asked where the love goddess was. On cue, Mei put on an elaborate show, and when she revealed herself, Hao Yi asked her to take good care of Sandy. His words confused the idol, but Mei told her not to worry and promised that she would love where they were going. The next moment, they disappeared and reappeared in the city of love. Mei took Sandy to see the sights before heading to other parts of the world and giving her the time of her life. Sandy sent Hao Yi photos to make him jealous, but he was just glad she had made another friend. Later in the day, while the girls were chilling in the famous stone hedge, Mei told Sandy that her feelings for Hao Yi had been sparked by the chocolate she ate. She'd gone to shoot a short video at the school, and that was how she got to eat the cake. Mei apologized for the mess she caused, but Sandy wasn't mad at her. She was more interested in whether Mei had more Cupid friends, and Mei confirmed she did. She then told her how the love gods and goddesses of the past used arrows to make people fall in love. When they realized it was just a hassle, they made the people start worshipping them and granted their wishes, until one god said enough is enough and built a love chocolate factory. He became the factory's director, and Mei swore he was the most intelligent and handsome guy she'd ever met. When she finished glazing the director, Mei told Sandy that if it weren't for the chocolate, she never would have met Hao Yi. She then began telling Sandy how great a person Hao Yi was, and Sandy assured her that she was very aware of it. The only thing she worried about was whether people would like the real her. Mei replied that they would, saying that her real fans were eagerly awaiting her new song. Moved by Mei's words, Sandy hugged her tightly and told her that she and Hao Yi would be her friends forever. A few days later, Sandy held a press conference to announce that she was going abroad to study. However, she promised to hold a concert before going, saying the song would be her original song. Mei was excited to hear this, and at that moment, someone came over to deliver the concert tickets. On the day of the concert, Sandy's old friend visited her and apologized for what he had done to her. Sandy told him he had nothing to apologize for and hoped they could move forward as real friends. The guy hadn't expected to be forgiven so easily, but he appreciated it and wished her success in all her endeavors. A little while later, the concert began, and the crowd went wild because of Sandy. She thanked them for their loyalty and then performed her new single, Cupid's Chocolates, which the crowd loved. As she rounded off, she took Hao Yi's hand, making him the center of attention. When he got all shy, she smiled, leaned in closer and thanked him for everything he did for her. Shocked, Hao Yi pulled away, but the damage had already been done, and everyone began taking photos of him. Those photos were then uploaded with questions about who he was to Sandy, and when Shu Welly saw them, she was pissed. The day after the concert, Hao Yi was still hiding from Sandy's loyal fans because of what happened. He had survived the fans, Shu Welly, and the reporters, but that still didn't guarantee his safety. When he spotted Jiran dragging a suitcase, he latched onto her and begged her to help him. As usual, she teased him, but agreed and took him to a cafe where he could lie low for a while. After the owner approved his stay, he found a spot to sleep, but then realized that someone else had already claimed the booth. He immediately apologized and tried to leave, but the man told him he could stay and sympathize with him when he noticed how tired he was. He also offered to buy him a cake, but Hao Yi declined. Just then, Zitong called to check in on Hao Yi, and he was extremely grateful that she hadn't misunderstood the situation. He then told her where to find him, and after he hung up, his companion asked if Zitong was his girlfriend. Hao Yi denied it, but because he was flustered, the man was convinced that Hao Yi liked Zedong. Suddenly, he gave Hao Yi a box of candy and asked if he believed in magic. Hao Yi said he didn't, and the man laughed, calling it silly of him to ask such a question. They were still speaking when Zitong called to say she was outside, so Hao Yi went outside to get her. When they returned, he was surprised to find the man gone, but the box was still there, so Hao Yi put it in his pocket. Mei stood outside the window watching them, but she didn't approach and left because she felt a little hurt that he was with Zitong. While she was sulking by the riverbank, the mysterious man showed up, and it turned out he was the director. He figured out that she messed up, and Mei pleaded with him not to tell anyone, promising that she already had everything under control. The director assured her he didn't really care that she'd messed up and reminded her she would be punished and stripped of her powers if her errors were discovered. However, he wasn't heartless enough to leave her to suffer, so he put a seal on her to help control her magic and warned her to stop interfering with mortal affairs. Later, Hao Yi watched an interview in which Sandy clarified the rumors about him, so Zitong suggested he return home. When he pulled out his wallet to pay, he realized it was foolish of him to try to leave while Zitong was there with him. So, he asked her to accompany him to the mall to buy a nightgown for his cousin. The store they went to had a lot of suggestive options, and after Zitong modeled them for Hao Yi, the guy couldn't form proper sentences. Not realizing the effect she had on him, Zitong suggested that they buy everything she tried on. Afterwards, they went to enjoy the rest of the day at the arcade. On their way home later, one of Xuan's haters from the anime convention and a group of guys stopped them. The girl claimed that Hao Yi had caused her trouble, so she was going to make him pay. Hao Yi asked Zitong to stay behind him while he spoke with their guests, and to her surprise, he beat them up just as the police showed up. Apparently, Zitong had called it in, and when the officer mentioned that his father was their chief, the boy walked off angrily. He didn't like that they had intervened, and it turned out he also disliked police officers. Zitong followed him to try to cheer him up, but Hao Yi wasn't in the mood, so he apologized and pleaded with him to stay with her a little longer. Deciding not to make her feel bad, he got her a drink, and they sat in the park, not realizing they were being watched. At the park, Hao Yi opened up to Zitong, saying he'd always wanted to be a policeman like his parents. However, their job made it impossible for them to spend proper time with Hao Yi. The boy spent most of his time alone, and even on his birthday, he bought his own cake and sang to himself. One day, some men seeking revenge against his dad broke into their house. The young Hao Yi had called the police, hoping his dad would come to save him, but he sent his subordinates instead. After that day, Jenig Hao Yi stopped wanting to be like his dad, and worst of all, his dad made them move a lot to avoid a repeat of the incident. Coincidentally, after their last move, he met Jin Ran, who took over responsibility for his parents and helped him with his studies. Hao Yi saw her as more of a family member than his parents, which was why he was always over at her place, even though she had bad habits. One day, she went to speak to his parents, and they apologized to Hao Yi for neglecting him. However, that didn't mean his relationship with them improved. Whenever Jiran came around, he pretended everything was fine because he didn't want her to feel like her efforts had been in vain. To make it up to him, his dad asked someone to teach him to fight, but Hao Yi still felt that pang of loneliness. Zitong felt sorry for Hao Yi and finally understood why he'd stuck his neck out for her. As she cried for his sake, Hao Yi told her not to. But Zitong refused to listen and hugged him. She told him not to act tough, when he was hurting and said it hurt her not to be able to help him the same way he helped her. Hao Yi tried to comfort her, but he still insisted that helping him was meaningless. The persistent girl refused to let the issue go and said she knew he still wanted to become a cop, even though he claimed he had abandoned that dream. As they hugged, they didn't notice Mei, who had been watching them quietly float away. She tried to convince herself that she wasn't affected by what she'd seen, but her body betrayed her. She began reminiscing about her time with him. Not surprisingly, she didn't know why she was feeling that way, and when she calmed down, she wondered whether she had a place in his future. Just then, the guy who had been watching Mei earlier suddenly appeared beside her. His name was Korg, but Mei wasn't happy to see him and began walking away. Korg chased after her and, after cornering her, demanded to know why she was avoiding him. Mei skillfully evaded his question and asked why he was in the mortal realm, to which he replied that he was there to take her home. He believed she'd done enough to help Hao Yi, but Mei claimed that there was still something she had to do. When she tried to fly off, he grabbed her hand and asked if she could still use her magic properly after spending so much time in the mortal realm. Mei replied that it wasn't his business and said she hadn't yet caught the person who left the chocolate cake on the rooftop, so that she couldn't leave yet. Krog argued that her reason was dumb, but Mei didn't care and told him she would only return after finding the person. The following day, Hao Yi was home when he received a call from Zitong, who told him that Xuan needed their help. 2 hours ago, Zitong met Xuan at the anime convention center and took her to see her new teammates, Shuwei and Qian. Surprisingly, Zitong was already acquainted with the girls, so Xuan ended up being the fourth wheel as they talked about clothes. However, she inserted herself back into the conversation when one of the girls tried to show Zitong Shuna's character design notebook. Shuwei and Qian hugged Zitong and told her not to be mad, explaining that they just wanted everyone to see how creative she was. One of the girls then handed Zitong her bag and insisted that she put on her queen costume, so she did. However, the costume wasn't complete as she had forgotten her crown in her locker at school. She worried that she wouldn't make it back in time for the contest warm-up, but her friends assured her that they had that part covered. Trusting in them, Xuan headed out even though the clouds showed signs that Thor was about to throw a tantrum. While she was gone, Shuwei and Qian aced the warm-up, and afterwards they entrusted her old maid cosplay to Zitong. According to them, it was Xuan's good luck charm, and Zitong could understand why. Just then, she heard a loud crack and saw it was raining heavily, which worried her, so she called Xuan. Xuan informed her that she was still at the bus stop and said she didn't think she would make it back in time because of the rain, but Zitong promised to buy her time. That was when she called Hao Yi, and he immediately rushed to school to get the crown, only to find Mei roaming the halls like a ghost. When he asked her to come with him to help Xuan, she suddenly began to cry and rushed into his arms for comfort. Confused, he asked what happened, but all Mei told him was that she didn't want to go somewhere. A few more minutes later, she pulled away and apologized for clinging to him when he was someone else's boyfriend. This made Hao Yi look at her like she was nuts and ask what relationship she was referring to. Realizing that she had misread the situation, Mei immediately perked up and told him to lead the way to Xuan, making Hao Yi wonder if the girl was losing her marbles. Meanwhile, at the convention center, Zitong was about to go on stage with Shuwei and Qian. They were worried because Xuan wasn't back yet, but Zitong pushed her nerves aside and convinced the girls that they could hold the fort until Xuan arrived. At the same time, Xuan was crying at the bus stop, but then Hao Yi showed up with her crown and an umbrella, telling her that everything would be alright. As he rushed to the center with her on his back, the rain let up, and Xuan's hope returned instantly. Back at the center, Zitong was on stage performing, but Xuan and Qian were worried because Xuan wasn't back yet. Suddenly, a smokescreen appeared behind Zitong, and Xuan stepped out of it, causing the crowd to go wild. However, she focused her attention on Zitong, thanking her for keeping the show going in her absence. Later, after the show, Xuan thanked Zitong again for her help, and when Zitong tried to return the maid costume, she refused to take it, saying it looked better on Zitong anyway. Hao Yi urged Zitong to accept the gift, and as they walked away, he began praising her acting skills. They were so engrossed in their discussion that they didn't realize that Xuan didn't follow them until she walked off in another direction. Days later, while Hao Yi was packing for the upcoming school camping trip, Zitong found him. She wanted him to write his name down for the group draw, and after he did, she rushed off. Hao Yi had noticed that she looked nervous, and even Mei pointed out that something fishy was going on. A few minutes later, Zitong met Xuan, and they turned out to be rigging the draw so they would end up in the same group as Hao Yi. It was all Xuan's idea, and as they discussed their plan, they didn't notice Yuan standing behind them. Later, during the draw, Xuan was shocked to see the number of marked papers had increased, but she had no choice but to grab them all. And when the teacher called out the names, she was pissed to discover that Yuan was the extra member of their group. On the day of the camping trip, Xuan led their group to the campground, but she was still pissed that Yuan had ruined her plans. So she took her anger out on the clueless Hao Yi, who was acting as their unpaid bellboy. Mei also made his job difficult by sitting on the heavy backpack. When he complained, she called him a weakling, but her words didn't register because he'd sensed the murderous aura the girls were emitting. The moment he pointed it out to Mei, she wished him the best of luck and left to explore the words. Almost immediately, Suwon appeared beside Hao Yi and began complaining about how he was moving at a snail's pace. Hao Yi explained that the bags were heavy, and when Zitong heard it, she apologized and tried to take her bag. Suwon immediately stopped her and said that it was the guy's duty to carry the heavy stuff. However, Yuan made a side comment which pissed Suwon off so much that she grabbed the biggest bag. Unfortunately, that was the heaviest one, and she fell under its weight, but she stubbornly refused to return it. As they continued their journey, Suwon picked a fight with Hao Yi and beat him up when he told her that she was a low-budget tsundere. Shortly after that, they arrived at the campsite. Suwon made sure that Zitong and Hao Yi worked together on the food, but Yuan still went to disturb them. She presented the bento she made to Hao Yi, and the boy instantly forgot that he was cooking and declared that he'd eat Yuan's dish. This made Zitong sad, and she asked what he wanted her to do with the food they made. Yuan claimed that Zitong's food wasn't a healthy dinner choice, which made Suwon mad, so she demanded to know whose food Hao Yi would eat. The terrified boy answered that he'd eat both, and that was enough to soothe each girl. The next moment, he received a call from Shu Weili, who said she was coming to him. Before her words could register in his head, a helicopter appeared and heavy bags were thrown out of it. Shu Weili followed shortly after, and as she pinned Hao Yi to the ground, she told him that she wouldn't accept his harem. Knowing she was crazy enough to attack them, he tried to calm her down, but Xuan complained that he was playing favorites. When she mentioned that Zitong had worked hard to prepare their food, Shu Weili overturned the grill and told them that her man would only eat the food she prepared. Shuan's anger instantly doubled, so she told Shu Weili to get lost because nobody liked a desperate clinger. Annoyed, Shu Weili began chasing her and accidentally set everything on fire. Hao Yi and Yuan immediately tried to put out the fire, while Zitong rushed to get water. But Shu Weili still tried to attack Xuan because she didn't think she'd done anything wrong. Hao Yi managed to stop her, but the crazy girl told him that she wouldn't rest until she got rid of the girls. As fate would have it, Zitong was pulled into the river by the current, and Xuan jumped in to save her without a second thought. Seeing this, Hao Yi angrily pushed Shu Weili's hands off him and rushed to save the girls. Shu Weili tried to stop him, but Yuan appeared beside her and delivered a factory rest slap. Not surprisingly, she tried to retaliate, but paused when Yuan told her that Hao Yi would never forgive her if anything happened to Zitong or Xuan. She then fell to her knees and tried to convince herself that Hao Yi could never get angry at her. Yuan pretended not to hear her as she tried to gaslight herself and retrieve the map to plot the safest route to save her friends. Meanwhile, Hao Yi was running along the riverbank when he suddenly called out to Mei to come help the girls. Unknown to him, Mei had already tried and failed because her magic had suddenly stopped working. The girls were trying their best to stay afloat, but the current was too strong, and they had grown weak. As soon as they were pulled under, Hao Yi jumped in to save them, and the three ended up clinging to a rock for support. Unfortunately, the current was still too strong, and as they were being washed away, Hao Yi asked the girls to grab onto his legs. The added weight caused him to lose his pants, and they all fell to the ground. A while later, it was nighttime, so Yuan suggested to Shu Weili that they stop and rest for a bit. Shu Weili refused, saying she wouldn't rest until she was sure Hao Yi was fine, so Yuan didn't try to stop her as she ran off. She hadn't even gone very far when she tripped over her feet, and instead of getting back up, she lay there crying. When Yuan found her, she didn't sympathize and told her it was dangerous to walk alone through the woods. She then sat with Shu Weili and gave her some bread because she hadn't eaten anything. Shu Weili quietly accepted the bread, but as she began eating it, she started crying again and admitted to Yuan that she knew she was insufferable. However, she believed it was the only way to prevent the past from repeating itself, as she didn't want to lose Hao Yi again. Yuan pointed out that if she didn't change, she would truly lose. Hao Yi and Shu Weili was left speechless. Meanwhile, Hao Yi finally found Zitong and Xuan again, but as he swam towards them, he lost consciousness. When he woke up later, he was out of the water, and the girls had started a fire to warm themselves up. A worried Zitong tried to check his temperature by putting her head against his, but that just made him flustered. After he succeeded in moving away from her, it was her turn to grow flustered because he was still without pants. Xuan then beat him up as though it was his fault he was in his inner wear, but after he put it on, everything returned to normal. They sat around the fire and discussed how to return to the campground. Hao Yi said all they needed to do was wait because he was certain that Yuan would come find them. Xuan didn't doubt that, but when she remembered that Shu Weili would tag along, her mood changed. Hao Yi apologized on Shu Weili's behalf, and Shun said he was to blame for Shu Weili's behavior. Eventually, they stopped talking about Shu Weili, and as they began wishing upon the stars, their rescue party arrived. Shu Weili immediately ran to hug Hao Yi, and as she held him, she cried and pleaded with him never to leave her. After she calmed down, she clung to him as they sat around the fire, sharing the food and drinks Yuan brought. Unknown to them, Mei was watching them with mixed emotions. She was happy they were fine, but sad she hadn't been able to help them. A while later, Yuwon held up the 2 sleeping bags that didn't burn, and Hao Yi proposed that the girls share them, but they refused and made sure he squeezed in with them. The following day, Shu Weli tried to start her day off by kissing Hao Yi, but Xuan stopped her and said it was too early to act like a curved farm tool. This led to both girls arguing, and as Zitong tried to act as their referee, Hao Yi noticed Yuwon sitting by the river. When he walked up to her, he saw that she was mapping out their return trip, and she told him that if they left soon, they would reach the camp by noon. The next moment, they heard Yuwon scolding Shu Weli because she'd ripped Zitong's dress, but the overpampered princess didn't even care. She claimed it was Xuan's fault and said that everything would have been fine if they hadn't tried to steal Hao Yi from her. Xuan angrily replied that Hao Yi would never like a stuck-up brat like Shu Weli, and that was when Hao Yi decided to intervene. However, before he could, Yuwon suddenly fainted, and that was when they realized that she had a fever. Unfortunately, they didn't have any medicine for that, so Hao Yi said he'd carry her back to the camp. He just asked Xuan to gather their things when a helicopter showed up, and Shu Weli's mom came down from it. The woman commended her daughter for giving her the slip again, but said she wasn't leaving without her. When she moved to fight Shu Weli, the girl surprised her by saying she would go with her as long as they got Yuwon to a hospital. The woman accepted the deal, and just before they left, she informed Hao Yi that she had arranged for a car to pick them up. The day after they returned from the trip, Hao Yi tried to clean up his apartment because Zitong had told him she was coming over. However, when the doorbell rang, it was Dong on the other side. Hao Yi tried to get him to leave, but Dong forced his way in and sat down like he owned the place. He then told Hao Yi that if he didn't make his feelings clear to Shu Weli, he would swoop in and take her. Hao Yi didn't respond, which pissed Dong off. So he grabbed him by the collar and said it wasn't nice of him to play with people's feelings. This time, he wasn't just talking about Shu Weli but Zitong, too. When Hao Yi finally responded, he asked Dong for time to think things over, and Dong agreed. As he turned to leave, he was surprised to find Zitong standing at the door, which they had forgotten to close earlier. She apologized for listening in on their conversation, but Dong just walked out without a word. Hao Yi then began cleaning up the mess he and Dong had made while Zitong sat drinking tea. But her curiosity pushed her to ask about Dong and Hao Yi's relationship with Shu Weli. Hao Yi told her his history with Shu Weli and how they became a duo after Dong transferred to their school. However, things didn't last because Shu Weli suddenly got herself a boyfriend and stopped hanging out with them. Hao Yi didn't approve of her choice, but because Shu Weli looked happy, he decided not to intervene. However, that decision came back to bite him when Shu Weli's boyfriend Yuze publicly announced his engagement to another girl. The heartbroken Shu Weli demanded to know where the cameras were, but he assured her that he wasn't playing. He also made everyone believe that Shu Weli had been the one chasing and clinging to him. The humiliation was so great that Shu Weli stopped going to school entirely, and when Hao Yi visited her, she had become a completely different person. Soon after that visit, she went abroad with her mom, and he hadn't heard from her until she returned recently. After listening to his story, Zitong asked Hao Yi whether he had romantic feelings for Shu Weli, and he assured her that he saw her only as a friend. The week after school, as Shu Weli was on her way home, she had the misfortune of running into her ex-boyfriend, Yuze, standing outside the school gates. When he approached her, she got so scared and ran off, but he went after her. Once he cornered her in an alley, he dropped the nice guy act and told her he wanted her to speak to her mom on his behalf. His family's company was going through a rough patch, and he believed Shu Weli's mom could help them out. Shu Weli agreed, and after he walked away, she sank to the ground, trying to calm herself down. Sadly, the encounter affected her so much that she locked herself in her room the next day and refused to leave. When her mother ordered her to go to school, she tearfully blurted out that she was being followed, but the woman didn't believe her. She assumed she was just acting out, but allowed her to stay since she was glad that Shu Weli wouldn't see Hao Yi. After she left, Shu Weli recalled what Yuwon had told her that night and decided to face her demons finally. So when Yuze called a few seconds later, she told him off and made it clear that she wanted nothing to do with him. In response, Yuze threatened to hurt Hao Yi, and Shu Weli's blood ran cold. Unknown to her, he'd sent a note to Hao Yi to meet him in the school's underground parking lot, which had no signal. When Shu Weli tried to contact Hao Yi, she couldn't reach him, so she rushed out in a panic because she assumed that Yuze had gone through with his threat. Later, while Mei was on her way to find Hao Yi, she witnessed Shu Weli getting kidnapped. At that time, Hao Yi was standing by a vending machine, replaying his conversation with Yuze. The guy had tried to play the good guy card, but Hao Yi saw right through him and swore to foil whatever plans he had. Just then, Mei showed up and hugged Hao Yi, saying she was glad he was fine. When he asked why she'd said that, she revealed that Shu Weli had been kidnapped, and Hao Yi became worried. The kidnappers had taken Shu Weli to an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town, and it was no surprise when Yuze was revealed to be the mastermind. Seeing Shu Welli's terrified expression brought him so much joy, but his smile turned upside down when she told him that Hao Yi would come to save her with the help of the police. However, he recovered quickly and told her that even if Hao Yi called the police, they wouldn't do anything because she'd only been missing for about 2 hours. At this, Shu Welli asked what he wanted from her, and he revealed that he needed blackmail material to force her mother's cooperation. Apparently, he had already approached her mom regarding his family's company, but she refused to help. Shu Welli immediately tried to get away, but Yuzi and his men crowded around her like hungry lions. Meanwhile, Hao Yi and Mei had just arrived outside, and Hao Yi cursed Yuzi for picking a place the police would have a hard time getting to. When he told Mei he was going inside to check that Shu Welli wasn't hurt, she pleaded with him not to go. Hao Yi explained that he had to and assured her that he would take care of himself. He also said he needed her help to gather evidence against Yuzi and handed her his phone. A few moments later, he made his heroic entrance into the factory and lost it upon seeing the state Shu Welli was in. However, before he could do anything, Yuzi threatened to hurt Shu Welli even more. When Hao Yi froze in place, Yuzi ordered his men to beat him up, but he didn't fight back as he needed to provide Mei with enough content to film. The more they beat him up, the more Shu Welli cried and pleaded with Yuzi to call his guys off, but he refused because he wanted her to see that her so-called hero was all bark and no bite. Suddenly, one of the guys picked up a piece of iron and brought it down on Hao Yi, but to everyone's surprise, Shu Welli jumped in front of Hao Yi and took the hit. As she stood there bleeding, she wondered if things would have been different if she hadn't listened to her mom all those years ago. It turned out that her sudden obsession with outdoing Hao Yi at school stemmed from her mother telling her that he would only acknowledge her feelings if she surpassed him. But Shu Welli took it a step further, treating him badly whenever she got the chance. Hao Yi eventually stopped putting effort into his studies and their friendship, but she didn't even notice. One day, while she was bragging about being in a key class, Hao Yi pointed out that they would now have chances to hang out, and that was when the consequences of her actions hit her. Unfortunately, there wasn't anything she could do to fix it. Back in the present, Yuzi tried to appeal to Shu Welli, but she had had enough of him and said she would never help him with anything. She also said she'd never liked him, but he didn't believe her and reminded her that she was the one who confessed her love to him with chocolates. Shu Welli laughed after hearing this and revealed that the confession had been on a whim. She'd actually gotten the chocolates for Hao Yi, but after Dong scared her, she lost her nerve and dropped the package. When Hao Yi bent to pick it, she screamed at him not to touch her stuff, but he didn't listen. Dong then began teasing her about having a crush on Hao Yi, and this drew people's attention. However, Hao Yi shot down the speculation by saying he was the last person Shu Welli would want to date. Hearing those words crushed Shu Welli's heart, but she pretended to be fine and snatched the chocolate away. It wasn't until she got back to her class that she broke down and began taking her anger out on the chocolate. As she sat there crying, she heard her classmates talking about Yuzi and how he was the most popular guy at school, so she decided she'd use him to get over Hao Yi. Hearing that he was a backup plan pissed Yuzi off, so he retaliated by admitting that he publicly rejected her years ago because he discovered that she had feelings for Hao Yi. Her humiliation was his consolation, and he said she deserved the isolation that came with it. Hao Yi tried to argue with him, but Shu Welli cut him off, saying Yuzi was right. She was convinced that she had to atone for her sins, and when she told him she loved him, he recalled that day in her room after the incident. So he told her she hadn't done anything wrong and that if anyone was to apologize, it had to be him. Of course, she disagreed. And as she hugged him, she begged for his forgiveness. But he told her it was time they moved on from the past. Watching the two of them pissed Yuzi off even more, so he called out to them, saying he was still the one calling all the shots. In response, Hao Yi revealed that he was actually in control and called out to Mei to upload the footage. Within seconds, the post was delivered to almost everyone in the city, including Yuzi and his goons. As they tried to figure out how Hao Yi had pulled it off, Hao Yi knocked the goons down and advised Yuzi to turn himself in. On cue, the police arrived to take Yuzi away, but he still attempted to attack Hao Yi with a knife. Shu Welli immediately acted as Hao Yi's meat shield, and as she lay bleeding in his arms, she said she was glad he wasn't hurt. Hao Yi tearfully scolded her for being so reckless, but Shu Welli didn't care and even smiled before she passed out. Later at the hospital, Hao Yi blamed himself for everything Shu Welli had gone through, but Zitong told him not to think that way. Unfortunately, Hao Yi strongly disagreed and, in the heat of the moment, told her she didn't understand what Shu Welli had gone through. Zitong recoiled at his words, but she still told him that Shu Welli wouldn't be happy to hear him blaming himself. Just then, Shu Welli's mother arrived and angrily slapped Hao Yi, as she blamed him for her daughter's predicament. When she attempted to hit him again, her husband stopped her and asked Hao Yi to explain what had happened. After Hao Yi did that, he apologized for failing to protect Shu Welli, but the man disagreed. He said if he and his wife had paid more attention to their daughter, things wouldn't have escalated to that point. Suddenly, Zitong rushed over and told them that Shu Welli had woken up. When they went to see her, she couldn't remember who Hao Yi was, so her dad rushed out to find the doctor. Her mother went after him, leaving Hao Yi alone with Shu Weli, so Zitong closed the door to give them some privacy. Hao Yi then sat beside Shu Weli on the bed and reintroduced himself to her. He told her that they had grown up together, but because he was a dense idiot, he'd hurt her. After pouring his heart out, he apologized and promised he would protect her forever. His words sparked something in Shu Weli, and when she hugged him, he realized that she'd only been pretending not to know him. The girls came in at that moment, and even though they scolded Shu Weli, she still tried to kiss Hao Yi. As he struggled against her, a girl showed up at the door and told Hao Yi that he had become quite the harem king. When she walked in, Hao Yi realized who she was, but before he could react, she threw herself at him and called him her darling. That word sparked the girl's jealousy, so Hao Yi quickly explained that Shido was his cousin. Shido didn't like that he had exposed her ruse, but she still told the girls that Hao Yi was hers alone. They responded by staring her down, and when she ran to Hao Yi for protection, they only grew angrier. Shido made it worse by making comments, so Hao Yi said goodbye to the girls and took Shido away. Later, at his place, Hao Yi told Shido to check his closet for something to wear, and the girl picked the nightgown Zitong had helped him buy. However, she didn't have the right appendage to support it, so Hao Yi whacked her in the head. As he began searching for something else to give her, she too jumped on his back and refused to let go until he agreed to tell her a bedtime story. The next day, Zitong, Swan, and Yu Wan stood outside Hao Yi's class and watched him like a bunch of stalkers. They noticed he was very tired, and when they began speculating about why, Shido showed up, claiming they had stayed up late doing plot stuff. Almost immediately, Xuan barged into the class and attacked Hao Yi, calling him a disgusting pig. He tried to plead his case, but Xuan wasn't interested. And since her accusation had attracted a crowd, he grabbed her hand and ran elsewhere. He then tried to explain again, but Xuan kept screaming in his face until Yuan and Zitong arrived and told her to chill out so he could speak. Hao Yi told them there was no point, as they wouldn't believe he was telling them the truth. Just then, Shido showed up and began defending him, even adding that she would never stop loving him. That declaration made Xuan start complaining again, but Hao Yi told her to mind her own business and then walked away with Shido. As expected, Xuan grew even angrier, so she called him all sorts of names. Yuan then pointed out that Hao Yi must have his reasons, but Xuan claimed his reasons were wrong and said they had to set him back on the right path. Later that same day, Zitong invited Shito to the rooftop and asked her to tell her more about Hao Yi's relationship with his parents. The fact that she already knew about Hao Yi's family situation made Shido say that Zitong wasn't just anybody. However, she still refused to spill the tea, saying all Zitong needed to know was that Hao Yi was her first boyfriend, which shocked her. The next day, she met Xuan and Yuan at a cafe and told them what Shito said, but Yuan was sure Shito was lying. Just then, Zitong spotted Dawn passing by, so they followed him and asked him about Hao Yi's relationship with Shido. Dawn's expression changed instantly after hearing their question, and he tried to walk away, but the girls didn't let him, insisting that he spill the tea. Left with no choice, Dawn revealed that Hao Yi once had a relationship with Shido, but said there was more to the story that he couldn't tell them. After Dawn left, the girl began feeling like they had done something wrong, and Zitong said she had almost forgotten that her goal was to help Hao Yi pick up his dream again. As soon as the words left her mouth, Shido appeared behind them and decided to open up to them. On the night Hao Yi had been nearly taken by his father's enemies, she came to see him and witnessed him throw his toy badge away. He told her it was because there was nothing good about cops, and when she tried to call his dad, Hao Yi didn't let her. According to him, his dad didn't care about him because, if he had, he'd have rushed to his rescue when he heard the house had been broken into. Hoping to cheer him up, she told him that she would accept his request to become his girlfriend. This part of the story made Xuan lash out because she refused to believe that Hao Yi had ever asked his own cousin to date him. Zitong pointed out that he might have done it out of loneliness and asked what Dong had been doing during that time. Shido explained that Dong wasn't Hao Yi's friend, and when she asked him to be, the boy refused. Feeling hurt, she declared that only she knew what Hao Yi truly needed because she was his girlfriend, and from that day, she was always with Hao Yi, making sure he didn't feel lonely. One day after school, Dong and Hao Yi were supposed to be on cleaning duty, but Dong left him to do all the work. When the teacher came later, Hao Yi claimed that Dong had already done his part. Thanks to Shido, Dong happened to overhear him, so after the teacher left, he came to help Hao Yi. He thanked him for covering for him and said that Hao Yi's girlfriend had come to pick him up. Hao Yi was shocked and quickly explained that Shido was his cousin and had only played his girlfriend in a show. Shido heard what he said but didn't come into the classroom because the boys had started chatting about video games. Shortly after that incident, Shido left to study abroad and only returned during the holidays. She admitted that she always liked seeing Hao Yi surrounded by friends, but she feared that he would be taken advantage of. Her words made Zitong realize that she had only been testing their loyalty to Hao Yi, and she didn't deny it. That evening, Zitong rushed to Hao Yi's place to inform him that Shi too was returning to the States. On the ride to the airport, Hao Yi said he felt ashamed that Shido had always looked out for him, even though he was older. He then tried to call her, but her phone was turned off because she already boarded the plane. Seeing how sad he looked, Zitong told him that they might still make it in time, so Hao Yi instructed the driver to take another route. It was a restricted area, but the driver drove through the barricade at Zitong's insistence, and when the guard tried to report the intrusion, Mei used her magic to scramble his radio signal. Xu Weili and the others also used their car to block the patrol car, so Mei told Hao Yi to pop his head out of the sunroof. She then used her magic to get Shido's attention and amplify Hao Yi's voice so she could hear him. Shido grew emotional upon seeing Hao Yi, but he promised her he'd be fine and asked her not to worry about him anymore. Even after the plane took to the sky, Hao Yi still called out to Shido, thanking her for all she'd done for him. When Xu Weili and the others arrived, Xuan told him to cheer up since he still had them. But Xu Weili just had to take things too far and stole another kiss from Hao Yi, much to Xuan's annoyance. That's all for now, but what do you think about Hao Yi's mismatched harem? And do you think he has resolved all the issues with the love chocolate? If you got this far, comment the name of your favorite girl. Also, don't forget to check out this next video.